The stories shaping Washington today, all ahead on C-SPAN Radio. We begin with the developments in a New York courtroom. Investigators seizing nude photographs of underage girls from the Manhattan townhouse of Jeffrey Epstein as part of a new investigation into allegations that he exploited dozens of minors for sex. That detail was disclosed by federal prosecutors earlier today as they unsealed an indictment against him. The New York Times is reporting that hundreds, possibly thousands of sexually suggestive pictures of nude or partially nude girls were found during a search of his Manhattan townhouse over the weekend. It came at the same time that he was arrested at the Teterboro Airport in New Jersey after flying back on his private jet from Paris. Jeff Berman is the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York.
Today, we announce the unsealing of sex trafficking charges against Jeffrey Epstein. The charges allege that Epstein sexually abused young girls by enticing them to engage in sex acts for money. Epstein was arrested this past Saturday evening at Teterboro Airport aboard his private jet that had just landed from Paris, France. Epstein was taken to the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan, and later today, he will be presented before Magistrate Judge Pittman and later a conference before District Court Judge Berman. The United States Attorney's Office will take the position at that presentment and that conference that Epstein should be detained pending trial. Epstein is charged in a two-count indictment. First, conspiracy to commit sex trafficking, and second, the substantive crime of sex trafficking of underage girls. Beginning in at least 2002 and continuing until 2005, Epstein is alleged to have abused dozens of victims by causing them to engage in sex acts with him at his mansion in New York and at his estate in Palm Beach, Florida. The victims, all underage girls at the time of the alleged conduct, were given hundreds of dollars in cash after each encounter, either by Epstein or by one of Epstein's employees. The underage girls were initially recruited to provide Epstein with massages and often did so nude or partially nude. These massages became increasingly sexual in nature and would typically include one or more sex acts as specified in the indictment. As alleged, Epstein also paid certain victims to recruit additional girls to be similarly abused. This allowed Epstein to create an ever-expanding web of new victims. This conduct, as alleged, went on for years, and it involved dozens of young girls, some as young as 14 years old at the time that they were allegedly abused. As alleged, Epstein was well aware that many of his victims were minors, and not surprisingly, many of the underage girls that Epstein allegedly victimized were particularly vulnerable to exploitation. The alleged behavior shocks the conscience, and while the charged conduct is from a number of years ago, it is still profoundly important to the many alleged victims, now young women.
The U.S. Attorney Jeff Berman announcing the details of the indictment. Jeffrey Epstein was known for socializing with politicians and royalty. Friends have included President Trump, former President Bill Clinton, and Britain's Prince Andrew. Back in 2002, Donald Trump described Mr. Epstein as, quote, a terrific guy. Quote, he's a lot of fun to be with, telling New York Magazine, it is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side. That from Donald Trump back in 2002. The federal indictment accuses Epstein of arranging for girls to perform those nude massages he heard just a moment ago, ranging from at least 2002 onwards. Today, wearing dark blue jail scrubs, Epstein entered a not guilty plea. If convicted, he could face up to 45 years in prison. He will remain in jail without bail until at least July 15th. More with the U.S. Attorney.
Could you give us any insight into why these charges are not covered by the immunity agreement that Epstein reached with the U.S. Attorney in Florida some years ago?
Yes, Jeffrey Epstein entered into a non-prosecution agreement with the Southern District of Florida. That agreement only binds, by its terms, only binds the Southern District of Florida. The Southern District of New York is not bound by that agreement and is not a signatory to that agreement. Yes.
Why is it being handled by the public corruption unit if it's just sex trafficking charges at the moment?
Well, I'm not getting into the staffing decisions at the U.S. Attorney's Office. I will say that I have confidence that the public corruption unit can ably handle this investigation prosecution as it has so many other matters. I will again urge you not to read into the unit assignment anything one way or another with respect to the investigation.
Looking at the evidence, how confident are you that Jeffrey Epstein is going to spend the next several decades of his life behind bars?
Look, I'm not going to comment right now on the evidence. I will say that we are going to request detention pending the trial in this case.
I was just wondering, reading this indictment, as someone has already asked, wasn't the activities alleged in this indictment already on the Department of Justice's radar way back in 2008 when Miami's U.S. Attorney General Alexander Acosta, now Secretary of Labor, brokered a state plea bargain? Why is there no accounting for the very robust participation of DOJ at the time? And is there new information that you have or new evidence?
I'm not going into any dealings with Maine Justice, nor am I going to go into any aspects of how our investigation originated. I will say that we were assisted from some excellent investigative journalism.
And let me follow up on that point, that investigative journalism from the Miami Herald, which is also reporting that prosecutors had prepared a 53-page indictment accusing Mr. Epstein of being a sexual predator. Those charges, as you heard just a moment ago, were shelved back in 2008 during an 11th-hour deal that was reached between the U.S. Attorney's Office in Miami and Mr. Epstein's lawyers. One of those lawyers working to reduce his jail time was Alex Acosta, who is now President Trump's labor secretary. During his confirmation hearing to become the U.S. Attorney General back in February, Nebraska Senator Ben Sasse pressing William Barr to look into the charges against Mr. Epstein.